Welcome to Starting Points, where one thing leads to another. Been talking about gardens, talking about wartime, and that reminded me of this series of books which I've mentioned before by Eleanor Estes. This is the one about Rufus M. And there's this scene in the classroom. The door opened and a man came into the room. This was an ordinary man. Mom had come into the classroom earlier. Maybe this was somebody's father. But he wasn't. He was a man who started right in talking about gardens. Everybody in the class should raise a victory garden, he said. Plant seeds and raise vegetables, so this country would have food enough for the armed forces and the stricken nations, and thus help win the war. He stated that he'd go up one street and down another, teaching the people how to plant their gardens and how to take care of them. My name is Hogan, he said. Be looking for me. I'll be there. And he left. The man's plan sounded good to Rufus. In the past, the four Moffats had planted small gardens, and sometimes they'd had real radishes, carrots, and lettuce from them that they could eat. He could hardly wait to get home and start his victory garden, especially after the teacher passed around bright packages of vegetable seeds to all the children. They were 2 cents a package, and the children could bring the pennies for them any time during the week. Rufus chose beans, string beans. Well, they get home, but Mama's not there. She's been called away to look after somebody who's sick. And they go in the backyard. Now, Moffat's backyard was very small. Their front yard was very long. What a vegetable garden they could plant in the front yard, the children thought. But then they would have to dig up all that green grass. And besides, they'd never seen a vegetable garden in anybody's front yard, only flowers. They'd better begin in the backyard, especially as Mama was away and they could not ask her what she thought. Maybe later she'd let them plant the whole front yard too. Now, this is a series of books that I've mentioned before as well. Elizabeth Enright. This book in the series was called Then There Were Five. And they've newly moved to the country, having lived in the city, but their housekeeper and cook and all around everything, Cuffy, knew about gardening and cooking and all those sorts of things. But she, like the mother in this story, was away looking after a sick relative. And Mona has been doing the preparing of things. And listen, Mona, Rush said suddenly a few days after, you'd better forget the delicacies for a while. Everything in the garden is getting ripe at once. Tomatoes turn red overnight. If they're not picked right away, they just lie down on the ground and rot to get even. And the cucumbers. Jeepers, 1 minute they're the size of my little finger, and the next they're junior-sized blimps. What are we going to do? So the children discussed things a little bit about tomorrow, we'll get things ready for them. Canning is the answer, Mona said. Oh, if only Cuffy were here. We'll do it ourselves. We'll surprise Cuffy. Well, it's just a great passage there. And not to give the stories away, I hate to read, but it gives you a flavor, I think, of the book when I do that. I maybe cut down on the reading, but I'm going to share something from this as well. This is Junket. It's by Anne H. White. This is Junket, as depicted by Robert McCloskey, who did the illustrations. And it's a neat book about a family which has moved from the city to a place in the country. Mr. McDonagall, being a city man, had never had a vegetable garden or any other kind of garden where gardens are likely to be. He had gardens in his dreams, in his imagination, and on paper, but never before in the earth. He did not realize that a garden in the earth has to be coaxed and coddled to come up out of the earth. And after it has come up, it has to be encouraged to stay up. He had no idea, poor man, what a lot of time and patience and know-how all this coaxing and coddling and encouraging demanded. He's expecting his 3 children to help a lot in the garden. And when he tells them about his plans, they're upset. It's not at all what they are expecting and wanting to do in the country. They have their own plans, and they go in tears to Mrs. McDonagall. And she then went to represent their case to Dougal. Dougal, you can't expect them to garden more than a little while each day, a very little while. Mrs. McDonagall sounded like a judge laying down an unbreakable law. But dear, how long is a very little while? Mr. McDougall asked. That depends on what you're doing, Mrs. McDonagall said. If you like what you're doing, several hours can seem just a little while. If you don't, several minutes would be plenty. Oh, I like that point she made. Mr. McDonagall looked at her and opened his mouth and shut it at once meekly. He knew that anything his wife settled never became unsettled. He looked very unhappy. Mrs. McDonagall looked at him. Being a generous and sympathetic woman, she knew what to do about an unhappy look as well as she knew about tears. She spoke up cheerfully. Dougal, why don't you get that man Polly to help you? He must know all about gardens. I'm afraid we could never afford 'em, Mr. McDonagall sighed. Dougal, I've often told you that it's silly to be afraid of something when you don't even know if it is there to be afraid of. Go and ask him. I thought that's a great point too. Now, I was looking for this story, and I couldn't find it, and I couldn't find it. And where did I put that story? And it's in this book called Winter's Tales for Children 1. There were 4 of them put together, edited by Caroline Hillier, Hillier. There's chances that you might come across them. And this is a story about Mr. Garden. That's the name that the children give to him. And it's by Eleanor Fargeron. And it starts off with this bit of conversation like conversation's often written, but then it just gets in without saying who says what. You just figure out what's going on. It's like a script in a play, and more conversation fills the next page and the next, and I just loved the conversation in this story. It just was. It's a delightful story, a touching story, and I think you would be delighted and touched too, maybe. And while I was looking around, I had a find. I knew I had Tyler, Wilkin, and Ski by Robert Birch, but when I came to talk about it, I couldn't find the book. I didn't know what I'd done with the book. I knew where I'd last seen it, but what had I done with it since I'd last seen it? And I felt so happy. There it is. There it is. So I just wanted to show you the cover of this book and underscore that this is a wonderful, wonderful, delightful story like Mr. Garden and like these three books. And fiction, well, I'm going to turn to science a little bit. Studying the Soil by William McKillican. And it's part of a Ryerson Science in Action series, all kinds of different topics. Great with photographs and data collecting and looking at what do you think and water guide, and probably would be a maybe used with grade 8, 9, even science exploration. So the importance of soil when you're going to grow things. And this is sort of a long essay, autobiographical, by Penelope Lively, Lively. She wrote a lot of novels for teenagers and for adults, and life and autobiographical things. Life in the garden. She lived in different places, and so she recalls and recollects the various gardens that she knew personally, as well as all kinds of interesting details and facts and things. I remember there was a part in there about Van Gogh and how Van Gogh, I just assumed artists somehow get the color to match the color that they're seeing, but there's a whole process of getting that matching or using colors beside each other, and gave me appreciation for the talent and observation of artists. Well, anyway, thanks for joining me. Until next time, bye for now.